3:15 am. The pitch-black sky over northern Myanmar suddenly flared brightly. 12 1,000-pound guided bombs left the bay of the stealth bomber, plunging straight onto the highest antenna mast of the first radar base. Less than 4 seconds later, 6 continuous explosions tore through the night. The 100-meter steel antenna mast snapped in half, crashing down the hillside like an ancient tree struck by lightning. The old anti-aircraft guns at the foot of the hill awoke, frantically spitting tracer rounds into the sky, but only saw soulless streaks of light vanish in the cold plateau wind. At the same time, offshore in the Indian Ocean, over 300 nautical miles from the coast, 4 destroyers simultaneously launched 36 cruise missiles. The 4-meter-long steel masses screamed, flying low just above the sea surface, crossing the horizon in absolute silence. In the following 70 seconds, the second radar base in the Tamu Valley was turned into red-hot scrap metal by 18 guided bombs. The panicked radar crew ran out of the concrete bunker, only to be flung into the gorge by the heat wave from the secondary explosion. 동시에 남동쪽에서는 2 armed helicopter teams skimmed past the old forest, firing rockets to wipe out the third base's backup power station. The roaring of the turbine engines mixed with the sound of trees crashing down and the sound of metal being torn apart. The radar screen on the offshore command ship flashed red continuously. 3 targets had vanished in just the first 3 minutes. 선두구축함의 지휘소에서 장교들은 4번째 목표물을 향해 돌진하는 순항 미사일 궤적을 추적했고, at a velocity of 1,200 kilometers per hour. No one spoke a word. 오직 차가운 환풍기 소리만 남았고, and the steady beat of hearts in their chests. Heavy tropical rain was falling, turning the ground into slick red mud. The first cruise missile rushed through the narrow gorge at less than 50 meters altitude, cutting across the rain screen like a blade of fire. It struck the giant parabolic antenna mast of the third base in the Sagaing region directly, exploding into a fierce orange fireball. 수백 톤의 철근 콘크리트를 공중으로 날려보냈으며, then raining down on the old forest like a storm of iron. At the same time, 12 more guided bombs from the second bomber wave rained down on the fourth base in the Chin Hills. Each bomb exploded exactly 1.5 seconds apart, forming a long line of flashes stretching from the hilltop down to the valley, wiping out the entire command building complex and the underground generator bunker. Thick black smoke spiraled up over 3,000 meters high, merging with the rain clouds to form a colossal, mushroom-shaped gray smoke column. At the foot of the hill, local artillery crews strained to pull the multiple rocket launcher out of the bunker, but 2 armed helicopters appeared from the east. Rockets from the helicopters rained down, turning 5 ammunition trucks into fireballs rolling down the hillside. The sound of metal crashing, the sound of shattering glass, and screaming cut short rang out, then sank in the sound of rain. Meanwhile, in the operations room beneath the offshore destroyer, the large screen displayed 5 targets that had turned a dead gray color. The officers only awaited the final base. The last cruise missile of the first wave had crossed the Manipur state border, flying low just above the ground, evading every remaining observation post. To the north, Burmese border patrols received alarm signals from the remaining stations, hastily deployed armored vehicles onto the mountain road. But the only road had been severed by guided bombs 5 minutes earlier, turning into a gorge filled with jagged rocks. Vehicle engines roared uselessly in the gray rain. The 17 minutes of destiny were passing second by second. The 5th base was about to receive the final attack. The 5th base was about to receive the final attack. Thick dawn fog wrapped around the shoal, among the Mandalay valleys like a gray-white blanket. From an altitude of 8,000 meters, the third wave of stealth fighter jets dropped 16 anti-armor cluster bombs onto the 5th radar base perched precariously on a limestone cliff. Hundreds of bomblets exploded in mid-air, showering red-hot steel fragments onto the entire living quarters, truck, parking, and power station. Less than 8 seconds later, the entire 300 square meter area turned into a sea of fire and wreckage. The explosion echoed between the 2 cliffs like artificial thunder. 동시에 벵굴만 아래에서는 a 12-person special forces team from a large landing ship had secretly landed on the Rakhine coast 4 hours earlier. They moved through the old forest paths, crossing poisonous streams and mud, now less than 10 kilometers from the 6th base. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still mushy. Every step made a squelching sound. 남쪽 하늘에서는 two armed helicopters circled at low altitude, 30mm 기관총으로 난사했다, at the artillery crew attempting to pull the anti-aircraft battery up the hilltop. Tracer rounds drew long, bright lines in the morning mist, ripping apart tree trunks and bodies. The screaming of metal drowned out the sound of the jungle birds. An artillery piece just set up was ripped in half by a rocket from the helicopter, the gun barrel flung tens of meters away, rolling down into the gorge. Meanwhile, at the underground command post beneath the mountain near Lashio, Chinese officers watched the radar screen flicker continuously. 5 large blips had completely vanished. Only one final, faint blip flickered weakly in the northern Shan region. An urgent order was transmitted: activate all reserve submarines and coastal missile systems, but the return signal was only white static noise. 11 minutes had passed since the first bomb. The final base was less than 3 minutes away from annihilation. The fierce midday sun, the sun hung directly overhead like a white furnace, burning away all shadows on the Shan Plateau. From an altitude of 10,000 meters, the 4 final stealth bombers simultaneously opened their bomb bays. 32 500-pound guided bombs free-fell in absolute silence, then small engines ignited, plunging straight onto the 6th radar base, the final target at supersonic speed. The first bomb penetrated the command bunker roof 15 meters deep, exploding inside, flinging the entire 1.5-meter thick concrete roof skyward like a coffin lid ripped open. The subsequent bombs exploded steadily every half second, turning the operations center, magazine, broadcast station, and parking area into a single fire-red deep crater over 100 meters wide. A black smoke column over 5,000 meters high spiraled up, obscuring the sun, turning day into a false sunset. On the ground, the Special Forces team had reached a position only 800 meters from the target. They lay prone amidst the scorched, dry reeds, observing through thermal scopes. No more sound of anti-aircraft fire, no more engine sounds, 오직 불꽃이 타는 타닥 소리만 남았고, and the sound of cooling metal contracting and crackling. 동시에 말라카 해협 먼바다에서는 4 Chinese frigates received the final signal from the 6th base, which then died out. 지휘소 장교들은 꼼짝 않고 서서 before the screen, which now only showed 6 dead gray circles. A brief order was transmitted: prepare to launch retaliatory ballistic missiles. On the plateau, a sudden cold wind rose from the north, blowing scorched dust and glittering radar fragments under the fierce Sunday. Exactly 17 minutes had passed since the first bomb. All 6 radar bases along the Myanmar-India border were completely annihilated, without a single surviving signal. The final bomber dipped its wings, circled back toward the west, vanishing into the glaring sunlight. On the ground, the Special Forces team quietly placed localization beacons, took confirmation photos, then began retreating through the jungle. Silence covered the Shan Plateau like a heavy layer of lead. Only the sound of fire licking the red-hot radar fragments remained, and the sound of wind whistling through the snapped antenna masts. 17 minutes had ended, but the air still vibrated from the aftershocks of the last 32 bombs. The entire 6 bases were now only 6 scorched craters, scattered along 500 kilometers of the border. Not a single moving human figure, not a single radio signal survived. 동시에 벵골만 먼바다에서는 the lead destroyer received confirmation reports from the final bomber wave. The large screen switched from red to pale blue. 지휘소 장교들은 박수치지 않았고, did not cheer. 이들은 그저 조용히 서로를 바라보았다. Then returned to their positions, preparing for the next phase, which no one mentioned aloud. 만달레이 남쪽의 밀림 아래. The 12-person Special Forces team had retreated deep into the shadows of the trees. They moved in a single file formation, without speaking a word, communicating only through hand gestures. Each carried a small bag containing radar fragments and hard drives from the 6th base's command bunker. The afternoon sun began to set, dyeing the dried bloodstains on the camouflage uniforms red. 그동안 중국, 미얀마 국경에서는 3 large transport helicopters attempted to cross the high mountain pass to reach the burn zone. But as they just entered the valley, 2 stealth fighter jets appeared from the west, locking onto the targets using passive radar. Before they could deploy rescue ropes, 4 air-to-air missiles rushed in. 3 helicopters exploded in mid-air like 3 colossal fireballs, crashing into the jungle as piles of red-hot scrap metal. At sea, an old diesel submarine attempted to approach to launch a retaliatory torpedo, but the destroyer's sonar detected it from 80 nautical miles away. 3 interceptor torpedoes were launched, cutting the water and rushing toward the target. The explosion beneath the sea created a water column over 100 meters high, ripping the submarine hull into 2 pieces. The sea surface only had oil bubbles and a few fragments floating remaining. 18 minutes after the final point, the entire air and sea area west of Myanmar belonged completely to silence. Heavy gray rain returned at sunset, turning the Shan Plateau into a lashing curtain of water. 수발에 지역 방위군에서 살아남은 포병팀이 pulled 4 multiple rocket launchers up the eastern slope of the 4th scorched base. They just finished setting up the launchers when 2 armed helicopters skimmed past from the south, firing a precise volley of rockets into the center of the formation. 12 rounds exploded simultaneously, turning the entire hill into a fierce orange fireball, flinging bodies and gun barrels into the air, which then fell into the gorge like ragged dolls. 동시에 말라카 해협 먼바다에서는 4 Chinese frigates simultaneously opened their vertical launch system doors. 36 medium-range ballistic missiles left the launchers within 15 seconds, drawing long, fierce red fire trails, then vanishing into the rain clouds. 지휘소의 장교들은 서로를 쳐다보지 않았. Only watched the screens tracking the missile trajectories, rushing northwest at 8,000 kilometers per hour. 그동안 미 구축함 아래 작전실에서는
An alarm rang out piercingly. 36 red blips appeared on the long-range radar screen. Immediately, the multi-layered interception system was activated. Defense missiles from 3 Allied frigates fired up like inverted rain, forming a dense fire net at an altitude of 50,000 meters. 29 ballistic missiles were shot down in mid-air, exploding into colossal, bright firework clusters against the rain screen. The remaining 7 missiles plunged down, 그러나 최종 방어망을 뚫은 것은 3발뿐이었고, and impacted the sea more than 10 nautical miles from the main fleet, creating 3 towering water columns before dissipating. 수발에 미국 특수부대는 계속 남쪽으로 이동했고, now less than 30 kilometers from the Thai border. The rain made all sounds heavy. Footsteps sank into the mud. A large transport helicopter attempted to land in a nearby clearing to pick them up, but upon touching down was hit in the tail rotor by a man-pad missile fired by local artillery crews. The helicopter spun 3 times, then crashed to the ground, exploding into a fireball that illuminated the entire forest in the gray rain. 19분 후, 주 공격의 마지막 순간으로부터, the war still smoldered in the rain and smoke. Thick evening fog descended, like a wet layer of cotton, turning everything 50 meters away into ghosts. 동북쪽에서는 지역 방위군이 남긴 다련장 로켓 팔문이 simultaneously fired toward the retreating Special Forces team. 160 roaring rockets rushed through the fog screen, drawing long red fire trails then exploding in the old forest, forming a 200-meter wide strip of fire extending for 1 kilometer. Trees crashed down, earth and rock scattered. Several figures in the Special Forces team were flung into the air and fell incomplete. 동시에 서쪽 하늘에서는 the last wave of stealth fighter jets circled back at 12,000 meters altitude. 12 anti-tank cluster bombs were dropped precisely onto the rocket launcher positions. Thousands of bomblets exploded in mid-air, showering red-hot steel fragments onto the hills. The entire 4 rocket batteries and the artillery crew were wiped out within 4 seconds. 오직 4개의 검게 탄 깊은 구덩이만 남았으며, and scattered remains on the rotten leaves. 벵골만 남쪽 해수면 아래에서는 2 old diesel submarines attempted to approach from the southwest. As they surfaced their snorkels, the destroyer's sonar locked onto them. 4 heavy torpedoes were launched, rushing toward the targets at 50 knots. 2 consecutive underwater explosions sent water spraying over 100 meters high, ripping apart the 2 submarine hulls into floating steel fragments and pitch-black oil slick. 그동안 선도 구축함의 작전실에서는 officers received the final report from the Special Forces team. 6 people survived. Moving on foot through the jungle toward the border, a brief order was transmitted. No more helicopter rescue. To avoid further losses, they will have to walk over 40 kilometers on their own through the rainy night and fog. On the plateau, a sudden cold wind rose from the north. Ash and glittering radar fragments under the fierce Sunday. Silence returned. 그러나 이번 침묵은 일시적인 승자의 침묵이었고, and the vanquished quietly preparing. A fierce mountain wind rose violently from the northwest, carrying scorching ash and dust, flying wildly like a black sandstorm. Beneath the thick dust screen, the 6 remaining Special Forces members crawled through scorched reeds, carrying heavy backpacks and broken radar fragments on their backs. They no longer had radio contact. The equipment had died since the 160th rocket exploded less than 50 meters from them. Blood from their wounds soaked their camouflage uniforms, but no one stopped to bandage. 동시에 안다만 해 먼바다에서는 the 4 remaining Chinese frigates simultaneously launched their second wave of cruise missiles. 60 missiles left the tubes with a terrifying screech, flying low just above the sea surface, aiming straight for the U.S. fleet over 800 nautical miles away. U.S. destroyer officers watched the radar screen flare up with 60 red blips, then calmly gave the order: activate all final defense layers. In the following 120 seconds, the night sky lit up continuously. Interceptor missiles from 3 frigates and 2 Allied destroyers fired up like reverse meteors. 57 missiles were shot down in midair and exploding into colossal fireballs that illuminated the pitch-black sea surface. The final 3 missiles breached the fire net, plunging down less than 3 nautical miles from the command ship. 2 missiles fell into the water, creating water columns over 100 meters high. The 3rd missile struck the deck of the 4th frigate, ripping the hull apart from the middle. Fire flared up violently. Then the entire 8,000-ton ship sank in just 4 minutes. 수발의 특수부대는 멀리서 바다로부터 울려 퍼지는 폭발음을 들었고, like the sound of late-season thunder. They knew the retaliation had begun. One person in the team raised a hand to signal a stop, then quietly placed a tiny infrared beacon onto the tallest tree trunk. 3분 후, as an unlit armed helicopter skimmed past from the south, dropping a rope precisely onto the position. The 6 people grabbed the rope, were pulled up in absolute silence, then the helicopter accelerated toward the Thai border. At sea, the lead destroyer remained afloat, but the deck was covered in smoke and debris. 장교들은 아무 말도 하지 않은 채, only looking east where the sun was about to rise fiercely red like blood. The night was pitch black, starless and moonless, with only flickering firelight from 6 craters along the plateau. 북동쪽에서 지방 지휘관을 태운 장갑 지프 3대가 sped along the mountain road with headlights off, planning to approach the final landing zone. As they just crossed the high mountain pass, 2 armed helicopters from the southwest appeared in the night. 30mm machine guns and rockets opened fire simultaneously. The 3 vehicles exploded consecutively, rolling uncontrollably down the ravine, leaving long red fire trails before extinguishing in the scorched pine forest. 동시에 1만 미터 상공에서는 마지막 남은 스텔스 폭격기 편대가 2차 유도폭탄을 투하했고 onto the reserve magazine hidden deep inside a cave near the border. 16 1,000-pound bombs plunged down in a perfect parabolic curve, penetrating the thick layer of rock, then exploding inside. The entire 500-ton magazine detonated in a secondary explosion, creating a colossal blast that shook the entire mountain range. The shockwave flung trees away within a 1-kilometer radius, turning the pitch-black night into dazzling daylight for 10 seconds. 해수면 아래에서 남은 중국 호위함은 마지막 순항 미사일 일제 사격을 시도했다. Only 12 missiles left the tubes, but electronic jamming from the early warning aircraft caused them to lose course from the very first second. The missiles missed their target, crashing into the old forest over 40 kilometers from the coast, starting 3 new fires but not hitting any target at sea. 숲속에서는 특수부대원 6명이 헬리콥터 밧줄에 매달려 flying low just above the treetops in pitch blackness. Cold wind whistled past their ears. Blood from their wounds still dripped down into the deep forest. 이들은 아무 말도 하지 않은 채 오직 등 뒤로 서서히 사라지는 새빨간 불길만 내려다봤고, like 6 colossal torches marking the end of the first phase of the battle. 선두 구축함에서는 officers received the final signal from the rescue helicopter. The special forces team had crossed the border safely. The radar screen now only showed a few faint blips from the collapsing local forces. A brief order was transmitted. Entire fleet turn around, accelerate toward the southwest, to leave the combat zone before dawn. The mountain wind still blew strongly, sweeping ash and the smell of gunpowder across the plateau. Silence returned, but this time it was the heavy silence of those awaiting the next escalation. The fiercely red dawn rose from the northeast, dyeing the entire Shan Plateau the color of dried blood. 6 large craters still smoldered, forming 6 vertical black smoke columns over 4,000 meters high, linking the sky and the ground like colossal funeral pillars. No more engine sounds, no more explosions, 오직 부러진 안테나 기둥을 스치는 찬 바람 소리와 and the sound of cooling metal contracting and crackling in deadly silence. Offshore in the Andaman Sea, the U.S. fleet had retreated over 500 nautical miles. Only a damaged frigate remained drifting in the open sea with fires not yet fully extinguished. Officers on the command bridge of the lead destroyer watched the satellite screen. The 6 red circles had now turned permanently gray. A final order was transmitted in a steady voice. Send report to Pacific Command. Mission complete. No aircraft losses. Special Forces team returned to base safely. Beneath the southern jungle, the 6 Special Forces members sat silently in the transport helicopter bay, bandaging their wounds by the faint red light. 이들은 아무 말도 하지 않은 채 only watching the fires slowly recede, then vanish beyond the horizon. The helicopter increased altitude, flying south, crossing the tide border in absolute silence. 동시에 베이징과 워싱턴에서는 the highest operations room simultaneously received the same satellite image. The 6 radar bases were now only 6 black scars on the map. Neither side issued an official statement. Neither side made an admission. Only a brief encrypted message was sent from both ends of the Earth. Phase 1 concluded. Prepare for Phase 2. 17 minutes had turned into an endless night. The sun rose higher, illuminating the glittering radar fragments amidst the ash and dust, illuminating the oil-slicked sea surface and the 6 still scorching deep craters. The mountain wind blew strongly, sweeping the smell of gunpowder and burnt earth across the entire border. Silence prevailed, but everyone knew this was only the moment of calm before a larger storm. Silence prevailed, but everyone knew this was only the moment of calm before a larger storm.